the Justice Department has reached an agreement with Assange to plead guilty. He's going to be pleading guilty to a single count of conspiring to unlawfully obtain and disseminate classified information. Now, the idea, and he's maintained his innocence the entire time. His attorney, who I've spoken to recently, you can see that interview on Al Jazeera or on my page. Although he maintains his innocence, he has now pled guilty to avoid any further incarceration. The U.S. won't pursue any more charges, and Julian Assange will be free. This is a battle, again, that has gone on for years. If you remember, Julian Assange published classified military and diplomatic materials that, of course, got leaked by Chelsea Manning, a person known as Chelsea Manning, a former American soldier. That happened 14 years ago in 2010. I can't believe how the time has passed. But the idea, again, was that the U.S. had committed war crimes, that there was a need for greater transparency about what the U.S. was doing, but also around the globe. When we think about the Iraq, what was happening in our illegal occupation and war in Iraq, but also the complicity of other nations. All of this is in the documents. It was like, there are war crimes happening in Iraq. We got to do something about it. Well, U.S. prosecutors were punishing him for leaking that stuff. They even prosecuted him under the Espionage Act. In fact, let me take a step back and say this. After the stuff was leaked, federal prosecutors said that what Julian Assange leaked back in 2010, particularly the diplomatic and military documents, they said that they were not First Amendment protected. And so they convicted him of espionage. And this got ugly. We'll talk more about it in a second. For the last 5 years, Assange has been imprisoned in Belmarsh Prison, which is the equivalent in the UK of a maximum security prison. The US was trying to extradite him for further prosecution. Before that, he spent 7 years inside of the Ecuadorian embassy in London. And he fled there because he had faced sexual assault allegations back in 2011. And so he was basically hiding there. And then those charges got dropped, but it didn't matter. He was in that embassy, and then they eventually let him, they no longer gave him protection. The moment he walks out of the embassy on the steps, if you remember, he got snatched up for something else. But ultimately, he was charged with numerous crimes under the Espionage Act. Under the Trump administration, there was a superseding indictment, a second indictment. They gave him another 17 additional counts of violating the Espionage Act. And so he has been attacked. There was pressure on the Biden administration to let him go. A little while back, Biden said that he saw a resolution coming, but ultimately it wasn't very clear whether he was going to be extradited or what. It wasn't clear what was going to happen, to be honest. And so when you have that kind of situation, there's not much you can do, right? If you're Julian Assange. The question is, well, there's a few questions here. One, why now? A cynical read of this is that Joe Biden and the Justice Department under Joe Biden wants some good public relations from the left. And so they're going to absolutely allow this to go. You know, they get their chunk of flesh. He pleads guilty. I mean, you talk about time served. The man's basically been captive for over a decade. So in that sense, they have gotten their pound of flesh. They have gotten the carceral punishment that they want. But there's bigger issues at stake, because even though Assange won't be executed or imprisoned for life, he has still spent nearly 15 years in prison for what many people consider, and not just individual journalists or individual leftists, but even major outlets like the New York Times, Washington Post, they've had these conversations. I mean, journalists have to be able to tell the truth. They have to be able to hold the powerful accountable. What makes a democracy function is the ability to hold the powerful accountable. And part of how you hold the powerful accountable is through the media. Rather than treating Julian Assange like a spy or a traitor, he should be hailed as a hero in the minds of many people, precisely for the very reasons that got him locked up. So the Biden administration made a decision. Now, we know the Justice Department isn't completely controlled or isn't controlled by the White House. It's not a political office, but let's keep it 100. Let's keep it 100 here. We know that this is a political choice, that these are all political choices, that the timing of it is political, that all of it is political. So Julian Assange is going to go back to Australia. He's going to be free again. But what happens now? The bigger picture, right? What happens when the next Julian Assange comes and they want to leak activity reports about Iraq or Afghanistan? If they want to talk about what's happening in Guantanamo, they want to talk about what's happening inside the State Department. I mean, these are all things Julian Assange did. And he did them. I mean, who knows why he did them? I can't get into his brain and say why he did what he did, but I can say that the outcome had a net good. Now, I don't believe that, well, let's move on to another part of this. The question is, what can and what should journalists do? Journalists should be whistleblowers. Journalists should tell the truth. Now, we don't have a right to hack into people's files. We don't have a right to leak information that's not ours to leak. But we absolutely have a responsibility. We absolutely have a responsibility to tell the truth and to hold the powerful accountable. And you can't do that if you always have a worry that the government, if you say too much, it's a little too much, or you do this instead of that, you zig instead of zagging, and somehow you end up, instead of on the Pulitzer Prize shortlist, you end up on an Espionage Act subpoena or indictment. That's nasty work right there if that happens. So in some ways, the liberation or the freedom for Julian Assange that we're seeing is a sign of possibility for journalists everywhere. It's the only way any of this makes sense.